How Super Tuesday could sway Democratic voters in Arizona.
Maybe Bernie Sanders gives Joe Biden a race for his money.
Plus, as a humanitarian crisis puts millions at risk, local nonprofits end up on the sidelines.
Currently, there's no Syrian refugees that are being relocated into Tucson.
And construction begins on a plan to expand Tucson's Sunshine Mile.
So this project really does a great job of putting some more continuity to Broadway.
Hello and welcome to Arizona 360. I'm Lorraine Rivera. Thanks for joining us. Democrats running for president face their biggest hurdle on Super Tuesday. With contests in 14 states, the results solidify the frontrunners ahead of Arizona's presidential preference election. As for what voters should take away, we got analysis from Hank Stevenson, editor of the Yellow Sheet Report, Edward Celaya, opinion writer for the Arizona Daily Star, and Zach Yenser, host of Tipping Point on KVOI 1030 AM. My thanks to all three of you for being here.
Thank you, Lorraine.
Thank you for having us.
Zach, tradition, the first person that's new to the program gets to go first. What do we make of Super Tuesday and what it means for Arizona here in a few weeks?
The big takeaway is that Latino voters are going to come out in a big way. They're going to come out for Bernie. But in terms of the real base of the base of the party, when it comes to African American voters who are very pragmatic and older voters who turn out at a greater number than younger voters, I think Joe Biden showed that a very typical turnout base of the Democratic Party is going to turn out. They're going to turn out for Joe Biden. And Bernie Sanders got the majority of the youth vote. The youth vote is usually under 20% of the turnout. And so I think that's going to be the challenge moving forward, where young voters resonate with Bernie Sanders. They don't turn out as well as some of the other groups that typically do.
Hank, you just got back from the Capitol. Democrats in Phoenix saying we've got slim pickings this election. I mean, what's the vibe up there?
We were talking about Joe Biden being, very far behind in the polls, not looking so sharp, but South Carolina really turned that around, and then Super Tuesday won 10 out of the 14 states. At least that's what it looks like right now. So he's seeing a lot of momentum, and whether that's enough to kind of overcome what I think a lot of people see as Sanders's support among Latinos, among young people. I think it'll be a game of who turns out, obviously. Whether Arizona's college students show up to vote, whether Latinos show up to vote. If that happens, maybe Bernie Sanders gives Joe Biden a race for his money. But if it's kind of the older, whiter, moderate Dem electorate, I think Arizona goes Joe Biden.
Just as far as endorsements go, at the Star, we kind of anticipated that this might be pretty close coming into this last 2 weeks before our PPE. So we have decided to hold off on doing our endorsement until this weekend. It'll be in this Sunday's edition of our paper. And like they've kind of touched on, we've really done that because there were just so many candidates. And we weren't quite sure until Super Tuesday, until yesterday, where exactly these candidates were going to keep going, who was going to drop out. So we kind of foresaw that, and that's what we've been working towards, at least at the Daily Star.
What do we make of some newspapers across the country who are saying, hey, we're going to stay out of endorsements this time around because it just doesn't bode well for us?
So I think what I don't like about that is that, number one, it kind of cedes the community voice, the institutional voice of a newspaper in a city. And number two, I think it kind of falls into the argument against having editorials by saying, oh, number one, nobody really cares what we have to say. I don't think that's really true. And number two, I don't think that the necessary role of an endorsement is to influence people to vote for somebody. I think it's to influence the conversation around the election. And I think that's what you'll see in our endorsement this weekend as well.
Zach, on your radio program, I mean, you talk all about these conversations and discussions. What are your listeners saying?
Well, listeners and a lot of folks around the country, a lot of newspapers around the country are saying that. A lot of our readership are saying, tell me, give me information about how to think, but not what to think. And so rather than just the typical conversation of, well, does a newspaper insert themselves into a political conversation, and do you risk alienating a certain base or not? Some are saying we want journalism that moderates, stays out of it, gives us the information, and gives us free rein to make our own decision. And I'm interested to see that sentiment really around the country. It's actually more newspapers are pulling out of the endorsement business, as you mentioned, not inserting themselves into it.
Hank?
Yeah, it was weird to see the Republic. I mean, I guess it was expected considering how they handled the last round of presidential endorsements. They caught a lot of flack. I'm sure their inboxes were just full of all caps screaming readers because they endorsed Hillary Clinton last time around. It was the first time in a very long time that the Republic has ever endorsed a Democrat for president. I guess given the reaction that they had and kind of the trend in the newspaper industry getting away from making these definitive statements, and even if you read the Star, the Republic, there are fewer and fewer editorials, op-eds by the editorial board. A lot more kind of leaning on columnists, a left columnist and a right columnist to give an equal side, where that used to be more of the job of the editorial board to take these big issues and say, hey, look, we've put some time into it, we've put some thought into it, we've reflected on our readers' values, and come to this decision, and this is why. And newspapers are just doing that less and less.
All right, I want to bring up something that you've all sort of alluded to in this conversation, but you're talking about the older demographic, you're talking about Latinos, you're talking about young voters. Are we at this point where we need to keep painting people with the same broad stroke on these topics?
Probably not. I think that there's obviously gradients within every sort of constituency. However, I do see the benefit in kind of looking for trends, especially in larger groups, and how that kind of affects the population at large. Obviously, individuals are going to act how they feel, how they react to stimuli, but there is something to be said for being able to track groups and kind of how groups act over a period of time. I think that gives us a very good idea of how things change at the macro level. At the micro, people are always making decisions, but at the macro, it really helps us make sense of what's going on.
Zach, on 10:30 a.m., I mean, you have a variety of voices who are chiming in. One of the things that I think is pretty common trend right now are Hispanic voters who are saying, I don't care so much about immigration, but I care about education and the economy.
I mean, I don't know. I might actually disagree with that a little bit. I think what's driving what I see and hear on the ground with Latino voters who are actually voting for Bernie, I'm interested because the political establishment, getting back to a former point, has gone behind Warren. The Latino political establishment, Richard Elias, Pima County Board of Supervisors, Andres Cano, LD3 representative at the state level. So a lot of the establishment got behind Warren, but the Latino voters I talked to are very much Bernie. On the ground, it's very much Bernie. And I think you saw in Texas, for example, Bernie's big Texas win, he didn't win the state, but his big part of the state that he won was along the border. And so I think immigration, I'm finding, is a big deal. Maybe not across the board, but that's maybe why we don't, paint with a broad brushstroke.
Right. Just quickly before we wrap up this segment, the coronavirus, the COVID-19, we had the governor and the Department of Health Services here in Arizona bring it to light this week. Thankfully, it's not to the situation that they expect, but they're prepared for it. Hank, you were at the Capitol all week. What's the conversation there?
Yeah, it's interesting to watch this public health conversation in a lot of ways morph into a political conversation. We had the governor sitting down with his Department of Health Services director, giving a very long press conference, frankly, to talk about what we're doing in the state to ensure that this doesn't spread too much, and also just a lot of tamping down fears. Like, look, people, as of this taping, we've had 2 confirmed cases in Arizona. This is not, at this point, a huge outbreak, but I think everyone sees that if we're not taking preventative measures, if we're not smart about how we handle this, it could become a much bigger issue, and frankly, could become an issue in the election season even.
The real difference that we're seeing here is what's being said online as opposed to what's coming out of actual media. That, I think, has been pretty good coverage, maybe a little bit alarmist, but when you jump on social media, Twitter, Facebook, that's where you're seeing this amplification of just untrue, half-truth, myths, And that's where I think the real danger in this disease lies.
At the state capitol, there's been a virus going around the last couple of weeks, and one of the lawmakers spoke up the other day. They were getting a briefing from the Department of Health Services director, and she said, it sounds like we all have coronavirus. Like, we've all been coughing for the last couple of weeks. Like, there's a flu going around here, people. Like, welcome to the Petri dish was the quote that I remember. So,
wash your hands.
You know, it could get worse. Maybe it'll shut down our state government.
Oh, okay. That could be a good thing or a bad thing. Depends on what you think. All right, we will take a short break, and Hank will cut you loose so we can get you back out there reporting for us.
Thanks.
While we often cover the influx of asylum seekers and migrants at our southern border, this week we're turning our attention to the humanitarian crisis in Syria, where war has displaced 11 million people and counting. As the violence ramped up, hundreds of refugees got fresh starts in Arizona, where they received help from a handful of organizations. However, that's no longer the case, as we heard from Jennifer Tompkins of the Tucson Refugee Ministry.
Currently, there's no Syrian refugees that are being relocated into Tucson. Because we have a ban act on Syria, the government is not relocating any new refugees from Syria here in Tucson, which is really unfortunate because we do have quite a few Syrian refugees here, and they will not be reunited with their family members. So their family members may be back in camps in Turkey or in Jordan and waiting there to be able to be relocated, but the United States simply isn't going to be the place that they're going to be.
What are you hearing from some of the Syrian families who are in Tucson and are grappling with that reality that they may not see some of their loved ones?
Right. There's several different things that they have fear around right now. One of them is the war that's going on. Of course, the civil war has been going on for years, but what's happened now is that there's some bigger allies that are coming in. We've got Russia coming in and supporting part of them. We've got, Turkey coming in. And the few places that were safe in Syria for families now are no longer safe. And so you've got 1 million to 2 million more people that are running for the Turkish border, where Turkey already has had like 3.6 million of the refugees, the Syrian refugees there, and they just simply can't care for them. So now they're opening their borders to Greece.
Some of the images that we've seen, the stories are heartbreaking with the freezing temperatures. I mean, literally children, adults freezing to death.
Right.
There are people who are here in Arizona watching this story unfold, and they want to help. So what can they do?
Right. I don't know that I have a great answer for that right now. I think that you can talk to your government officials and say, hey, we got to get involved in this. We got to be able to help with this. I think that a lot of people are feeling like the war has gone on so long and we're not really helping in the conflict. I think that it could escalate a lot more. I think that we need to be able to contact our government and get some changes happening.
You're talking locally, state, federally?
All. I think all areas of the government need to know that this is a concern for us, that we have citizens that have Syrian background, and that we love our neighbors, that we are concerned for humanity, that we're concerned for people who are in an area where there could be just mass genocide happening.
What's life like for a refugee who's resettling here in Arizona?
Yeah, so a refugee is, of course, they go through lots of trauma on their way of coming here. So you were in your home that you're really happy in, and you love that space, and you're surrounded by your friends and your family members and your faith community and your tribe, really. And then war comes. And one of my really good friends, she was pregnant, 8 months pregnant. War came, and they were trapped 30 days in their home with young children right there in Syria, and by night ended up having to make a run for it. They ended up in a camp in Jordan where where she gave birth by herself in a tent, not surrounded by her friends or her family members. So there's these layers of things that happen, and then they're sitting there at the camp and they're being vetted over several months, maybe even years. So they have all of these interviews that are happening, trying to see, are you safe? Are you safe? Are you safe? They're really probably the safest people in all of the United States because they've been interviewed more than any other population that we have to be able to be resettled. And if they're one of the lucky few that gets resettled in the United States, this year we're only taking 18,000. They only get to know that a couple weeks before they fly. And so what happens is that they fly to the United States. They have to repay the United States for those tickets so that when they get settled and they save up enough money, they're able to repay for those tickets to come. but they only get 3 months worth of resources. And so they get, the resettlement agency brings them in, they put them into an apartment, and they give them 3 months worth of resources. And during those 3 months, they are helping them to do things like getting kids settled in school, or trying to help them find a job, or trying to help them set up for assistance. But they only have 3 months worth of resources to be able to become self-sufficient. And I don't know of anybody who can, learn the language in 3 months or be able to find a support system enough to be able to be on their own in those 3 months. So I think that's where a lot of other people are kind of coming in, school districts, community partners, nonprofits like us, to be able to help them to truly be able to resettle and be able to become successful.
Despite those obstacles, you sound hopeful.
I am hopeful. I really love this community. All refugees, but especially even the Syrians are really close to my heart, because they do truly want to have community. They want to have that tribe, and they're looking at building it any way they can. They love having American friends. They want to be able to have people over to their homes. They want to be hospitable. They want to be able to connect in and give back to the community. And that's what we're finding, especially with some of the teens that we're working with. They're going and doing community projects with us, and they're really connecting in and really owning this, I'm now American, and so proud of that.
Crews have broken ground on a long-awaited project to widen Broadway Boulevard in Tucson. Expanding the so-called Sunshine Mile between Euclid and Country Club actually covers more than 2 miles of roadway at a cost of $72 million. It will take 20 months to complete. As for what to expect until then, I got behind the wheel for a tour with City of Tucson officials, including Greg Orsini, Engineering Project Manager for the Department of Transportation.
We had to take down these 2 large overhead sign structures that span the entire roadway, and for safety reasons we closed down Broadway on Sunday for about 8 hours, took those sign structures down, and then actually did a traffic switch to get the traffic from Euclid to Fremont on the south side of the road, so that next Monday the contractor can start with the storm drain installation. And part of the reason you see pavement in such distress is due to water. So on this project, we have a very large storm drain system going in across the whole 2 miles. It's as large as 96 inches, a round diameter pipe. That's an 8-foot pipe in diameter. And so that's a very intense construction activity. That facility goes down about 20 feet below the ground, and the trench open up to put that in place is very wide, and we need that very secure for the safety of everyone who would be in the area. And so that effort is a very long process, and is very much a reason why a 2-mile project like this will take 20 months.
Now, this sort of detour here where we just got into, it's not ideal. Any challenges when you do erect those sorts of barricades to try and slow down traffic?
There are challenges. For instance, the little merge area we just went through, we had to relocate the Suntran bus stop a little bit down further past Euclid, so that their users could safely enter the bus area, and so that the bus can pull into an area to have safe refuge.
As we near downtown, Orsini briefed us on how long it's taken the city to get to this point.
It's my understanding Broadway Euclid to Country Club has been a project planned since the mid-'80s, probably since right around the time I was born. And it went through a long planning phase.
An idea decades in the making, it was put on hold, then moved again in 2006 when the Regional Transportation Authority approved a half-cent sales tax. Then began years of discussion to include a planning phase, citizen advisory committees, public input, and design involving multiple components.
We had a lot of right-of-way acquisition, had to purchase property in order to fit in our project improvements. And then now finally we're here at what we might call the project delivery phase, getting it constructed and providing this benefit to the public.
Tell us about acquiring some of these properties, to make all this possible.
Sure. So Broadway from Euclid to Country Club was originally planned to be an 8-lane facility with dedicated transit lanes on the outside. The mayor and council of Tucson did not find that palatable. And so we ended up going with a refined alignment where we have a 6-lane facility, no dedicated transit lanes, and that very much minimized the amount of right-of-way compared to an 8-lane facility that we had to acquire. But going through that acquisition process, there's appraisals, fair market value is what's provided to the property owners, and it all kind of goes back to eminent domain as we build these improvements for the public.
Another unique piece involves saving historic structures. The Rio Nuevo district lifted these houses in hopes they can be repurposed. Other efforts extend beyond these parcels.
Since the project goes through all these years of planning and design, the RTA was very smart in having a specific business assistance program. It's called the Main Street Business Assistance. And basically, businesses along the corridor can get consultation services regarding how to keep their business up and promote themselves during the construction. And those are provided free of no charge to them.
So we get to Broadway and Keno, and it looks like it's over, but stay tuned because there's another project coming in this phase, right?
Correct. The project is 2 miles. We have most of our efforts right now on the west mile between Euclid and Campbell/Keno, but there's plenty of work to be done on the east mile. It's the same roadway improvement where we're widening the 6-lane facility. Coming up in the near future, we'll start water work, underground water work on the east mile, and so we will see some more traffic impacts there.
So for people who wonder, you know, in Arizona you have 330 days of sunshine, we don't have natural disasters the way some other places do. Why can't a project like this be completed sooner than 20 months?
The way you would get a project like this completed earlier is by having multiple work shifts through the day. And because we have so many businesses and residences abutting to Broadway, we don't want to do a 24-hour type operation and disrupt their whole lives. It may be we'd finish months sooner, but we believe doing the work in a general 8 to 10 hour workday is kind of a better balance in terms of the disruption to the public.
As our tour comes to an end, Orsini makes one last effort to remind drivers that he and the city understand this is not easy, but it is necessary.
I've worked on these big roadway design projects for many years now, and what I find is during the planning and design process, folks are very, very vocal at that time, and they have a lot of input, and sometimes some folks are against the project. But basically, once our shovels hit the ground, they understand we're here, we're performing the construction, they're going to get an improved roadway and all the features associated with it. And at that point, you know, they have their pain during construction, but they accept that it's time to build our improvements and bring Tucson up a bit, improve our town.
Well, it should come as no surprise that commuters in Pima County have a lot of opinions about the state of our roads. I'm joined again by Arizona Daily Star's Edward Celaya and Zach Yenser, host of KVOI 1030 AM's Tipping Point. Now, both of you are at the receiving end of hearing what people think when they're driving, they're sitting down for the morning coffee. Let's talk about the Broadway widening project, one that you try to avoid, and you're going to come back in about 2 years to see how that ends.
Right.
Let's talk about the feasibility of some of these construction projects because it's the great equalizer. We all drive. Edward?
The big thing that people are kind of disappointed in is that this is not or they don't see it as a multimodal kind of improvement on Broadway. They see it more as for people who are in cars. And at least according to the city's own numbers in 2010 when they did this study, there hasn't been much traffic that's been added since the 1980s to this part. So I hear a lot from people who are really advocates for more public transportation, a rapid transit lane, or expanding the existing streetcar.
One of the themes that I do hear from neighbors and businesses is it almost feels like fait accompli, right? In the sense that voters decades ago voted on this, we need to follow through on it. And so yeah, when it comes to some of these elements, it feels like, well, we're just kind of rubber stamping at this point, and that has been a disappointment to some. Although I actually hold out hope, Edward, when I talk to different directors of transportation or even Rio Nuevo, the dream is still alive for this to be a multimodal road. And I think what I hear from neighbors and businesses as well is that the project for public spaces has been heavily involved. They help communities figure out walkability, multimodal, how to make it more human-friendly. And so the optimist in me wants to hold out hope that it will be the dream that everybody has for it to be that way.
Essentially the gateway to downtown, very close to the university, though. Is this the right place for these conversations to be having about, just the influx, the high volume of traffic? Are there other areas that are being left out of these conversations?
That's an interesting question. I think that just from a promoting density sort of standpoint, like obviously you would want it in this area. This is where the majority of this it's kind of the center of the city if you're looking at it from that way. Taking these sort of projects outside of the city core, outside of where the density already resides, kind of is a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're just going to get more density, more traffic around those sort of areas. It will always rise to meet kind of the demand you create in that sense.
And the planners from way back when, why didn't they anticipate this growth? We're a university town. I mean, we had to have seen it coming, right?
To me, this is kind of an indication that the money was there. We had to do something with it. We've been planning on doing something with it for years and years. We might as well get it done.
My question is, because I live in the downtown core, is why are we doing Sunshine Mile, Broadway rewidening, and downtown links starting later this summer? I personally don't think that there's people in a room thinking about how do we mash these all together. I mean, in this case, downtown links was supposed to start a while ago, right? As I can remember, and what held it up is that the contractors brought forth numbers that were not financially feasible for the city. So the city had to say, go back, bring us better numbers. And that's why we're at where we're at now. So if that all worked well, downtown links would have been happening or almost done, better working with Sunshine Mile. I think a lot of this comes down to funding, political will, and construction timing. And so maybe that helps comfort some drivers who are wondering, why is Ruth Roth cut off as INA's being done? Why is downtown links happening as Broadway is happening? It's a mess. But I think there are reasons for the mess that are sometimes unavoidable.
Reasons for the mess, talking like a parent now. Okay, and come back in 10, 15 years, it'll all be perfect transportation.
Sure.
Just like the kids.
All right.
It won't be, but that's why we'll be here talking about it, right?
We'll have you back then. Okay, my thanks to both of you.
Thank you, Lorraine.
That's all for now. Thank you for joining us. To get in touch, visit us on social media or send an email to arizona360@azpm.org and let us know what you think. We'll see you next week.